The reason I bring all that up is that I think regardless of whether you become an electrician or you study art history and get a BA, all of you have to.
How can a set of skills lead you down the path to success? That's what we're setting out to answer on the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sangster. Join me as we unpack how leaders around the world have taken training and skills and turned that into a lasting career. Now let's learn together. Hi, it's Michael Sangster, and welcome back to EdUp Canada. And have we got an episode for you today? Sometimes you just meet people. You meet them in the strangest places, and this individual I met at a conference in Toronto when 8 of us didn't know each other and went for dinner. And by the end of the night, I think we had talked for 3 hours about life and travel and employment, careers. It was a fantastic connection. And then when we had our conference last June in Kansas City, my guest today, Brooke Roberts, lives in Kansas City. So we were able to get together and attend, even joined us at the World Needs More Canada party and had a great meal. And there may have been a few Canadian beers left over that Brooke was able to take home and enjoy with her partner and a few friends. And that was a good time. So Brooke, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I feel like that first dinner in Toronto, I felt like an honorary Canadian. So I was the only U.S. citizen at that table. So I felt kind of like an outsider, but you all were so welcome.
We brought you right in. So let me kick off. We always try and start with a bit of a focus statement about what we're going to talk about today. So someone does something for a reason, but some people are able to do what you want when you want. And that is the ultimate dream. Add in having the ability to do it where you want, and you've hit the trifecta. But with increasing competition for workers around the world, these jobs can be harder to find unless you make them yourself. That's where Brooke Roberts comes from, and that's why she's joining us today. So we're going to chat today about some of the skills you need to develop in order to take the digital nomad lifestyle and make it your own, be a solopreneur lifestyle. I think that's your word, Brooke, that you use, a solopreneur. We'll talk about skills and mentors and being your own boss. But before we do that, Brooke, give us the FYI on you.
Thank you. Yeah. So I always joke that I've had 9 lives. I don't look like I've had 9 lives. Obviously, I'm very young. No, I'm not. That's a joke. But I feel like my story has, like most people, has taken a lot of twists and turns over the years. And I've always talked about the eras of my career. I was talking about eras long before Taylor Swift. I'm just going to say it right now. She spends
a little bit of time in Kansas City.
Yeah. Now she does. Yes. We're basically besties at this point. I grew up in Kansas. I'm a born and bred Kansas farm kid, grew up in the middle of nowhere. I always joke that if you've seen The Wizard of Oz, which many people have, I grew up in the black and white part of that movie. That's where I grew up. And when I was in high school, I had a very serendipitous opportunity to travel anywhere for the first time. But it happened to be to France and Spain for 2 weeks with my Spanish teacher and several other students. And the only reason I was able to go is because it's a story. I won't bore you with it. But basically, my grandpa, there was a farm accident. Anyway, it involves a tractor. It's the most Kansas story ever. But I was able to use the insurance money I got when he crunched up my car with a tractor accidentally to send myself to Europe instead of getting my car fixed. And it was the best money I've ever spent in my life. And it completely changed the trajectory of not only my view of the world, but my view of what I thought I was capable of. And so that led me down the path of even believing I could go to college. I was the first person in my family to go to higher education of any kind. And I decided I had to go as far away as possible without leaving the US. And so I went to college in Boston. I studied poli-sci and international affairs. And I thought I was going to be this like CIA agent around the Middle East and all the things. And it turns out I did a couple internships in that space, and I don't like how the sausage gets made at all. I was not interested. But at that time, by then I had studied abroad multiple times. I was super fascinated about the rest of the world. And my advisor, when I went to a panic my senior year going, I have no idea what's going to happen. She said, go to grad school and become a study abroad advisor. And I was like, that's a thing, that's a job. And so, yeah, I did exactly what I was told to do. Go get a master's degree, do these internships, take these classes, and you will be a shoo-in for this career. Well, I finished grad school. I applied to 75 jobs, and I did not get an interview for one of them. I got a few emails.
75 jobs. I've heard you tell this story. 75 jobs.
75 jobs. And obviously, I had no idea what to do. I thought I had done everything right. I had done exactly what my mentors and advisors had told me to do, but yet I still was not the top candidate or a candidate really for any of these positions. And while it's not a high paying career, at the time it was a quite competitive career. So I knew that I had a lot of people I was competing against for these roles, but it was very, very challenging. It was a really hard time for me at that time. And so I did the thing that everybody in the international ed world typically does when they are panicking is I decided to go teach English abroad. And so I went to China for a year and taught English at a university over there. And while I was there, I started just researching and trying to figure out how do you stand out in a super crowded market as a potential employee? How do I get to the top of the pile, so to speak, of resumes and make sure that they say, I have to talk to that girl. I have to know that story. I have to know how she did this or how she can do that here at my organization. So with a lot of trial and error at the end of that tenure in China, I started reapplying. This time I didn't apply for 75 jobs. I applied for 7 jobs, but it was much more strategic and it was much more fine-tuned. And I'm proud to say I got 5 of those job offers out of those 7. And anyway, so that launched my career in international education. And I've worked in international internship program design and deployment all over the world. I've run study abroad offices and international program divisions at universities. I ran the largest media platform for international programs called goabroad.com for several years. And then that all led to me becoming into my entrepreneur era. And I left that job to start a tech startup. I thought I was going to be this next unicorn and did the funding and did the pitch competitions and did that whole world. And that later transitions into a bunch of other businesses and things over the years. Then the pandemic hit and the international education industry was basically demolished. And I was basically contacted by the CEO of a company called Podium Education. And this was in 2021, I think. And at the time, I had gotten a new job as director of international programs at Johnson County Community College, which is like a career college here in Kansas City. And they poached me. They said, hey, we love what you've done. We'd love for you to come and run marketing for us. And so they made me an offer I can't refuse. And so here we are. Now I'm talking to you. So that's how we met. I was at that conference for Podium Education. And yeah, stay tuned for the next era.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time for today's program.
I know.
It's one of the beautiful parts about these conferences that we do get to go to. You go to a lot more of them than I do, but there is a camaraderie to them, but there's a chance to learn and pick up a little skill, a little bit of thought from somebody else, somebody different. I do want to unpack at some point the fact that your grandfather destroyed your car with his tractor.
Destroyed. I shouldn't have said destroyed.
No one got hurt? I'm assuming nobody got hurt.
Actually, destroyed was like hyperbole. I shouldn't have said it that. He ran into it and put a huge dent in the driver's side door, and it was crunched in, but it still opened and closed. It was all good. And so instead of getting it fixed, like most of my peers would have done, because, it's got to look right, I said, I don't care what it looks like. I'm sending myself to Europe. So destroyed is an overstatement. But in my world, it was, a big moment.
The 75 jobs to 7 to 5, you're getting better at it. That's a good sign. As you get older, you're getting better at the application process. So that's good. Let's dive into what's made you successful. Let's talk about skills. So we like to have the learners who listen in on the podcast to hear about different people's skills they've picked up, they've made successful. And let me put a spin on it that we ask people on occasion. When you're hiring, the skills you're looking for from people too, because that's always interesting. And we've got an interesting collection of answers that we're looking for people on that from. So give me an idea of skills that you think you made you successful and ones that you look for when you're hiring or partnering.
I think this is It's definitely a skill, but I don't think it's something that you can study. I think it's just something you have to practice. And I think it's sort of that key thing that I uncovered going from that 75 jobs and getting none to the next round of applications I submitted is the big thing I learned in that is that nobody cared about me yet. They didn't care about me. They didn't care about my laundry list of experiences or the skills I said I had. They cared about my ability to translate all of that gobbledygook on my resume into something that mattered to them in their context. And so I was applying to universities for roles in study abroad and international programs. And so in that case, every institution's different. Their priorities, their challenges, what they want to achieve it's just different across institution. So instead of sending out a blanket, hey, I've done all these things, you should hire me, I tailored what I'd done in a way that said, hey, I did this thing. Here's how I would apply it to your mission, the things that you're struggling with as an office. And they tell you what they need in the job description. They tell you what is a priority in the mission and vision and strategic plan of the organization. So it's not cheating. I just used what they told me and basically said, hey, I can help you achieve these things by doing X, Y, and Z. And X, Y, and Z is the skills, the knowledge, the experience that I'd accumulated over the course of grad school and different experiences I had. And so I think for me, the skill that was most valuable was basically being able to read the room and know how to position myself in a way that people would care. Instead of just saying, hey, here's everything. I said, here's the most important stuff just to get in the room so I could talk to them.
You ended up sitting next to me at dinner. So that was very poor judgment reading the room. You could have done better. There was much more interesting people at the table. What about
it wasn't that big of a table.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's a fair point, actually. What about the skill you're looking for? You're talking to people, you want to work with people, especially younger people getting started. What's that thing you look for? And let me give you a hint. The one we've heard a lot of, which has caught me off guard to starting, but it's the ability to write a sentence.
Oh,
the ability
to
concisely put something down on a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, maybe this is showing my age now, but my assumption is like, well, duh, that you're going to bring that basic skill to the table. You know, in my career coaching, I've run a career coaching program for about a decade now. I always tell people, don't mess up the small stuff. Don't give people a reason to be distracted from your broader message and what you bring to the table. So in that instance, don't send an email saying, hey, I want this job, and not use proper grammar and capitalization, punctuation, all those things. That's only going to distract them from the greater mission of you are the most amazing web designer ever. You want them to focus on that, not that you don't know the difference between there, and there. So,
very good advice. Be concise, be focused, be strategic.
Yeah. So I feel like some people will say, oh, that's just like a boomer thing or, you know, an old school way of thinking. And my thing is like, well, don't shoot yourself in the foot. Don't give people a reason to say no before they've even had a conversation with you.
Interesting. So let's talk about the 4.5 months that you spent last winter.
Yeah.
I think this is incredibly intriguing to people that they can go do, as we talked about in the opening, whatever they want, or it takes hard work to get there. But if you get it right, you can figure out what you want to do. What you did was do it where you wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And you hit the road for 4.5 months and call yourself a digital nomad, but you traveled all through Europe working, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yes, last fall, 2023, I spent 4.5 months living, working across Central and Eastern Europe. But the thing is that it didn't just happen out of nowhere. Back in 2008, God, 2008, I read The 4-Hour Workweek, which is sort of a cult classic amongst the entrepreneur world, if you will, especially digital nomad space now. But nobody used that term digital nomad back then. But he talked about taking these mini retirements throughout your life. And I'd already worked in international programs, and so I got to travel quite a bit for my job. But I also liked the idea of just being able to work from anywhere and still have a gainful employment, et cetera. And so that sort of planted this seed of this thing could happen. Well, back in 2008 was a lot harder. We're still using fax machines. So it was a very different time. High-speed internet was still, especially around the world, on developing, I guess. And so fast forward, I got basically poached again by GoAbroad.com and the founder there. And when I negotiated that job, I said, hey, I want this job to be location independent. I don't want to have to be in the office. We did have an office, but I wanted it to be part of the deal. So I could go visit my best friend in Florida or head off to Panama or wherever I wanted to be. I didn't do that as much because it ended up being a pretty high demand job, but I just knew early on that was going to be a critical component of all of my future employment, whether it was employing myself or by other people. And then once I left that role at Go Abroad and I was working for myself, after about a year, I said, why am I staying in Colorado at the time I lived there? And why do I need a house? And why do I need all this stuff? So I sold it all. And whatever was left over, I just put in my car. And I spent the next 6 months traveling around the U.S., staying with friends. Airbnb wasn't as big yet, but I started using a little bit of like long-term stays, house sitting, things like that, and sort of tried it out domestically. And then I moved to Kansas City for like a year. And then I said, I'm done. I got to get out of here. And so in 2016, I left for a year and a half and traveled all over the world as a digital nomad, essentially working from a new place every month. Came back to Kansas City, stayed here for a year, thought, I'll just stay for a year and I'll go do it again. That was 2019. 2020, I was supposed to leave. As we know, that didn't happen. And so I've been here ever since. And so I always had this bug and this part of my identity really that involved long-term slow, I would call slow travel. And so I said, hey, the world's kind of back to normal. I'm going to go do it. I have a remote job. All of my side projects I can do from anywhere. And so I just did. So I told my partner, this is part of who I am. You just got to deal with it. Talk to my boss, my company, just to make sure it was all on the up and up. And I hit the road. And so, yeah, I was spent 4.5 months in Turkey, Czech Republic, Croatia, Greece, Albania, Italy, and England. Yeah.
Awesome. What an experience. What a chance to do. We think we need to sit and have a conversation about coast to coast in Canada with Brooke Roberts. Maybe there's something there. Maybe we need to get you going spending a couple of months this summer in Canada, going from one coast to the other.
You guys have the best trains like that go coast to coast. And I've seen all the YouTube videos about it. And that's definitely on my bucket list. I would love to do something like that in Canada.
The train trip is spectacular. The train trip through the Rockies and through the prairies is a pretty spectacular trip. So we touched on skills a little bit. We touched on your career. You're in the education sector in a different way than me, but talk about like what you see in the career education sector, the career skill development sector. If you were building a program, if you were involved in looking at something for a learner coming up, what are those skills or what are those programs you'd be thinking about building? Maybe it's an unfair question a bit for you, Brooke, but I'm intrigued because you travel through the world in a different light. Mm-hmm. And maybe you've got a perspective on the type of things and skills that people are looking for that we should be training better for.
I talk about this a lot with people. I am not the type of person who thinks that you have to get an undergraduate, a bachelor's degree or master's degree to be successful in life. In fact, I think we've swung, at least in the United States, I'm not sure what the rhetoric is in Canada, but the rhetoric in basically the 90s, it really swung in one direction, saying undergraduate degree is the only way to be successful. And becoming a plumber or a pipe fitter or an electrician or, I don't know, lots of other sort of trades type of careers just became less and less sexy and less respected in a lot of ways. And I think just that is incredibly sad. I think, one, it takes a really intelligent person to be able to do some of that stuff, like all of those things. I couldn't do it. I have no idea how electricity works. But I also think, too, that I think it's a very respectable path. And I think people shouldn't be scared by society to pursue those things because it doesn't have that, like, I don't know, I'm a director of marketing kind of sex appeal that like the online world might tell you need to have.
Plumber might be making more money and having a better lifestyle than the director of marketing, 100%.
100%. And the director of marketing is probably paying off $50,000 in student loans from their art history degree. So nothing against art history degrees. But so the reason I bring all that up is that I think regardless of whether you become an electrician or you study art history and get a BA, all of you have to amass in-demand skills that are relevant today, that you can leverage in a lot of different ecosystems that's going to make you a unique and top of the pile candidate, as I call them. Somebody whose like resume gets seen and gets the interview, because that's all your resume does. It gets you an interview. That's all it does. And so for me, I always like people to add some surprise and some interest to make themselves stand out. So it's sort of those Venn diagram of interchange, like overlapping skill sets. So for me, as an example, I had basically by trial and error in my own career learned a lot about what it takes to get noticed. But I also knew a lot about international education and the ecosystem of higher education in the United States. But I also had started my own side blog and learned about SEO and social media marketing and paid ad marketing and also how to write great content that keeps people on the page. All of those things combined is the reason I got headhunted for goabroad.com. It wasn't any single thing. It was the combination of those things that made me the ideal candidate, that made me a singular in the number of people that I was competing against, because nobody else had that combination of experience and skills. So my thing, if you're an electrician or you're an art history major, is like surprise some people. You know, if you're an electrician, have a kick-ass, beautifully designed website. It's so easy to do now. I mean, you can just go to Squarespace and have a beautiful website instantly. If you are an art history major, learn basic data analytics and be able to show that like, hey, I can help us increase the number of people coming to our gallery by analyzing the data of when people are coming and groups that are coming. I mean, whatever, the data's there, but be somebody that can bring a skill set to a surprising venue. That's the thing that's going to make you stand out. And for me, that agility and that ability to read the room and say, oh, okay, I've got this art history knowledge and a skill set, but how am I going to surprise someone with this extra little something that I bring to the table?
There's a lot to unpack in that answer. We tend to not compare Canadian and U.S. rhetoric. Your situation is a little bit different these days on the political climate than we have, but when it comes to the skilled trades and those kinds of issues, we are absolutely seeing the same kind of movement towards that respect for those traditional trades.
Good.
We were at our joint conference in the Kansas City where we got together. No, it was the one in Vegas, and they had Mike Rowe come. The work he's done around making Dirty Jobs was the first one, but then his foundation and their work they're doing around creating interest in skilled trades. And it's interesting to hear when you talk to people in Germany about the way they do things around, they guide people to different career paths. It's not so much your choice in some ways. You're guided to a skilled trade, but it is a respected trade to be in.
Yeah, 100%. And I also don't want to demonize the undergraduate degree by any stretch either. At least in the United States, the data shows that an undergraduate degree, almost across the board, does result in your earning potential over the course of your career to potentially be higher, potentially, right? That's the kicker. But I also think there's so many paths forward. I mean, I always love to say, two kids from Kansas grew up in the same household, same mom, same situation, is me and my brother. My brother's 3 years older than me. And I was the bookworm. I was the nerd. I was involved in the music and the sports and all the things. And my brother barely got through high school. And we both had very different visions for what our lives could be. And especially what our mom tells us now is like, oh, I was really worried about your brother. Wasn't worried about you. But my brother found his way. He ended up becoming a respiratory therapist. He has a 2-year degree. He has a great career. And now he makes more money than I do. But I think both of us had really great paths and really great experiences doing what we do. And there's no fault in either of our stories.
And Grandpa did not drive his car over with a tractor, I hope, unless if Grandpa hit both cars.
No, it was not
a different conversation.
Yeah, it was not a recurring offense. We got him better prescription after that. It turned out he hadn't gotten his updated glasses, and that was the culprit.
It's good to hear. We've gone through an interesting international student debate, very, very political debate in the last month. It's been very heated conversation around the kind of international students we're bringing into Canada, where they're going, how many should be in every institution. And it's interesting to hear you talk about that conversation about the undergraduate degrees and so on. We're not able to recruit people to come into Canada to become truck drivers through a training program and have a work permit to stay. We're looking for 70,000 truck drivers right now in Canada. And we need to bring in more people to train for that kind of work. And we'd like to see more of that. And we've proposed some programs with the government to do that. But if you're taking a master's of theology, you come right in without a permit.
Oh,
you're good to go.
Yeah.
Because we really need 70,000 masters of theology. So we need to get a little bit more strategic in some of the work that we're doing as well here. And I hope we get there once the politics comes out of it.
Right. Well, and I think that just speaks to the bias of just adding on the bachelor's degree component to that makes it seem like, oh, these are intellectuals, so therefore they're probably better citizens in society, and all these assumptions and stereotypes we might have about somebody at that level of education versus somebody who just, quote unquote, just gets an associate's degree or just gets a certificate of some kind to do a trade. And I just, the
doesn't add up.
Yeah, exactly.
It does not add up to helping us get to where we need to get. So we're getting a little bit down a side path here. I want to come back to you. We like to finish up with a couple of things, but first off, before we get there, anything that you want to ask me, anything you want to talk about today that we haven't touched on before we do what we call our big strong finish? That's the big personal question.
Oh no. Did you send me this question?
No, we did not send you this one.
Okay. Well.
But as you've listened to every episode, I know that you know what the big question is.
Yes, I have listened to every episode. Okay. Let's see. A question for you.
Or something you want to get across. Something you want to talk about today that you think is important for students and learners or instructors or people running career colleges.
Yeah. I think the phrase personal branding is thrown around a lot, at least in the career space. And I'm a big advocate for building a personal brand, except I kind of like to edit that just a little bit. I don't think you have to build a personal brand, because the kicker is we all already have a personal brand. Unless you are like truly off grid, somebody out in the woods somewhere has never been online, like you won't be listening to this podcast, but everybody online has a personal brand, whether you've cultivated strategically or not. And so my argument is that everyone needs an authority brand. And so if you're running a career college or you are, in this career space and thinking about how do you get your next job or up level to whatever your next goal is really think about how you're positioning yourself as an authority brand in your space, and doing that in a way that is authentic and is based in storytelling and isn't a lot of fluff. There's so much fluff out there. But I would just encourage, I think a lot of students come out of their education and they just don't know how to position themselves. They don't know why the skills, the knowledge, the experiences that they've had are actually valuable to Michael Sangster or Brooke Roberts or insert any other person and in their context. And so if you can help students start to unpack that, they are going to be so much more successful. I feel like I kind of bang on that drum a little bit, but I think that is incredibly important in an incredibly competitive career landscape, is that you have to stand out. And the only way to do that is to make sure that you're communicating your value in a way that matters to whoever you're talking to.
That's great advice. You guys can't see us, but Brooke got to see my dog who just joined me in the room.
It's a test.
If I don't pick him up.
It's a test. You're trying to distract
scratch his ears. No, if I don't pick him up and scratch his ears, he'll start barking. This is the fun of working from anywhere, right?
Yeah.
You never know what can happen.
Oh, I know.
Okay, so let's go back to our finish strong around dogs and what can happen, I bet, from your trips. Let's dive into the big question, the big finish strong one that we let everybody focus in on. And it's always fun because I guarantee you within a couple of days, you're going to phone me with another one. You're going to send me a text going, I hadn't thought about this person.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Who's your mentor? Who's the one or two that was that moment in time that changed you? Because I think it's important that we all find one, lean into them. I think I've found about 10 through doing these podcasts that I've thought about, that guy affected me. This woman affected me in this direction. This leader did this for me. And I've thought back about my own impacts on people too. Whether they're mentoring moments or just leadership moments, the way you've treated people that you got to think about every day. And I think it's important. You talked about a really interesting perspective about I won't use the word brand, but being unique and being an individual that people understand the strengths that you bring. Talk to me about a mentor, somebody who made the difference to you.
I've had a lot, but I think the most pivotal mentors I've had were, one was my high school English teacher. He was also the football coach and the wrestling coach and the baseball coach, but he didn't fit the stereotype of that type of teacher. He's still alive. Very much an intellectual, loved literature. Of course, in his class, he taught me a lot about how to unpack the story behind the story when we were reading different novels. But outside of class and outside of the sports and stuff, I got to have a lot of really great conversations with him. And he was really the first adult in my life. Of course, my parents love me and believe in me, but they were busy blue-collar working people. They didn't have a lot of time for the warm and fuzzies. But he, was one of the first people to tell me that I could dream beyond the farm, that I could consider going to college. I could consider going to college outside of Kansas, that I could think about leaving the country and going on a trip abroad. And he didn't force me, he didn't push me, but he gave me those little nuggets of confidence that I was worth it, that I had the ability, that it was okay to fail forward, those types of things. And he was a really, really important figure in my life and still is. I am still in contact with him. The next person. I was
going to say, are you still in touch? Because
yes.
We've had a few interactions now where people have sent them the podcast so they could hear it. And the people didn't know they were a mentor.
Yeah. Well, I've talked about him on a different podcast and sent it to him. I don't know if he I don't know if he knew how to listen to a podcast, but hopefully maybe he's retired now. He has time to figure it out. And then another person, sort of a few years later when this is like a mentor that helped me learn hard lessons. And instead of giving me oh, you're so great vibes, which was needed when I was in high school, when I was in grad school, I think, again, this is probably a big reason I didn't get offers for 75 jobs. I just thought too highly of myself without reason. And I had a professor, Dr. Mike Coombs, and he still close with him and in contact with him. But I remember he pulled me aside and said, Brooke, you can be a little prickly sometimes. And that was kind of the first time I'd ever gotten true constructive feedback on the sort of negative side of the scale, if you will. And it was hard. I cried, as you do when the first time you've ever been told you're not good enough. But it also helped me realize that my brand isn't about what I say about myself. It's how I make people feel. It's how people talk about me when I'm not in the room. And that is just as important as the website or the resume or my LinkedIn or any of the other sort of tangible things, so to speak, that I can put out there about myself, is that how I make people feel is also incredibly important. And it's still a lesson I learn every single day of my life.
Don't we all? And you lose your temper one day and you realize, what did I do there?
Yeah.
And then you got to pick up the phone and make it right, because you realize that you've left a mark on somebody that's not going to help.
100%.
We all do it.
Yeah.
We all do it. So there's some great advice in there.
Yeah. He's great. And he's also given me some good, advice and positive feedback over the years, but that's one that's always stuck with me.
Well, that's some great advice. There's something in every episode. There's something we pull out of it. And you don't know this, but you're our 20th episode.
Yeah.
We are
Congratulations.
Getting going here and still building. I'm told that most don't survive past 10.
That's correct. That is true.
So I try not to look at the listenership because sometimes you realize that you know more people than are listening to your podcast. It hits you, but we are growing this audience and having some fun. But there's a little lesson every time. And I'm taking one from you today. Fail forward.
Yeah.
And I had the pleasure of working for a gentleman from Winnipeg that used to say, but he led us to make mistakes. If you're not making mistakes, you're not trying. You're not doing new things. But God damn it, he would say, put your hand up and admit the mistake, admit the problem, so we can all dive down and fix it. And I'll never judge you for making the mistake. To me, that's fail forward. Fail because you're doing something. If you're just standing there refusing to try.
100%. It's sort of like it kind of goes back to speaking to job seekers and advice for them. I think, you've been in the interviews where you say, well, tell us about a time you failed or, weakness, it's the negative side of the spectrum. And, it's always that faux faux weakness, faux failure. You're like, well, I failed to, I don't know, organize the file folders or something. I don't know. It's just something silly. It's not real. And
it should be a big thing.
Yeah, and for me, I would much rather hire the person, all other things being equal, that like really was authentic and said, yeah, here's how I screwed up. But then also is able to say, here's what I learned from it, and here's how I do it differently next time.
But you better be a leader. I had one that I went in her office one time because I had failed miserably, and it probably could have fired me. I had misjudged it and not fixed it, and tried to fix it myself, and finally put my hand in it. We got a problem here, and we got to fix it. Door was closed, took my head off. She was right too. But when the door opened, nobody knew that we'd had an argument. Nobody knew that we'd had a problem. And all we did was find a solution and work our way through it. She said, we could have been here a week ago.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have yelled at you for half an hour because of the way you handled it. But the best interview, you talked about interviews, the best interview question I ever had, I asked that question of somebody. And the individual I was asking, started to talk about someone that failed that worked for him.
Oh, no.
And I was surprised. No, but it was great because what he wrapped it around with culture. And the culture he tried to create was this individual failed but put their hand up and we fixed it together, and I never judged them and I never mentioned it again. And he actually talked about the culture and almost exactly what you said, but from the other end, going, you want to have people who fail because they're trying things, they're doing things. So it is a great answer. So we try and keep this thing around 30, 35 minutes.
Not with me. I could talk all day.
That is the challenge. I should warn you all, before we started, Brooke said she was down and a little tired today. You know, it was the end of the week for her, but the energy is everlasting with you, isn't it?
Well, you get me hyped up. Yes.
Thank you for joining us. We love doing this. We're going to put in, this is going to take longer than the podcast. We're going to put in all the links of the projects that Brooke's doing on the side. And I got to tell you something. I don't like your side hustle line. They're businesses. Every one of them is a business. I've never liked this side hustle thing. I like business.
Yeah.
It's a project. It's an operation. Because it's not a side hustle. You put your back into it. You work hard on them all.
I'm a marketer. I know. It's about the copy.
I just don't like
it's
the phrase.
100%. But also go to Google Trends and.
I know. I am just too old and too out of it now to be considered a trend.
Well, it's all about the hook. You got to get the hook in, and then once people are paying attention, then you can explain the finer details of.
Sitting at the kitchen table, telling my kids who are both at university, saying I have a podcast now, and their heads turned and went, "You what? You what?" That was a fun moment. I'm not a trendsetter, never have been. Thanks for joining us, Brooke. I have thoroughly enjoyed connecting again. It's always fun. Look, till the next time we see you at one of these events, we will list all the projects you're working on because there's a lot of little things there that people can take from. I think it'd be very valuable. And I appreciate your time. There's something there, the fail forward I'm going to take from you today. I always write down a little phrase. We can always be learning. We can always be learning from somebody else. And appreciate your friendship and appreciate your time today. Any last thoughts before we sign off?
No, I just want to say congratulations on 20 episodes. That's badass, amazing. And your kids should totally be impressed by you, 100%. And yeah, absolutely. I've loved getting to know you over the last, has it been over a year? It's been over a year.
Over a year now.
Yeah. I can't wait to see you again in Canada.
And we're going to do the Canada, Brooke, coast to coast Canada. She's going to be a digital nomad across Canada. And for those of you who don't know it, Kansas City's a great town.
Yes.
If you get a chance. And I got to tell you, the food was great, but those cocktails were fantastic. Every restaurant had their own little, and it was just, I think we went on Cocktail Row there. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
The whole city was alive, clean, loved it.
Yeah.
So we enjoyed being there. Look forward to being back. And with that, we'll sign off on our episode here of the EdUp Canada podcast. And we look forward to being back with you all again next Wednesday. Thank you. Thanks for listening to another episode of the EdUp Canada podcast. We release new episodes regularly, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you know when they are officially out. If you love this episode, please leave a 4- or 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts so that others can also discover how a set of skills can lead to success. Thanks for learning with us.